One late evening, Optimus Prime was sitting outside the base, looking at the sky, looking at wonders which star where Cybertron was located, when he suddenly hears a voice behind him, and he turned around and saw it was Elita One, one of the female Autobots of his on his command. She asked him if something was wrong, but he said nothing was particularly wrong. He just enjoyed to sit there outside the base, just look up at the sky and remember the time on Cybertron. There were in fact something about his on his mind, because millions of years ago on Cybertron, just even before the civil war between the Autobots and Decepticons, Optimus was really much in love with Elita. They spent quite some time together on just racing against each other on the streets, or just sitting there and watching the skies together, even Cybertron. But when the Civil War started, they fought by side to try to stop the Decepticons by taking over. Especially now when they all are scattering from needs supplies or primarily energy. But after they had to abandon Cybertron in order to survive. Even just before then, Optimus wanted to tell Elita many times about his feelings towards her, but never did it, because with the constant battles in the Civil War, made it almost impossible for them to have any moment for themselves just to be talking. But after they abandoned Earth, Cybertron, and went to Earth by accident, he thought maybe on this new planet where he was able could be able to tell Elita, and they could all live in peace. But they never happened though. After they all were crash landing. But it was only about this time when after he was awakened, million years later, even after all of this, Optimus' feelings towards Elita One had never been stopped. But this particular night, Optimus just sat there and they both start talking and talked about some old memories from back home. Then Optimus had asked her if she had the opportunity to go back to Cybertron. Would she prefer leaving Earth and go back home and live there? But in fact, Elita once said that even though she missed Cybertron a lot, but she had also get used to living and even adapted to live on Earth among the new friends. And Earth was something that was rich on life and even worth to protect. And from that moment, she never wanted to leave Earth unprotected against the Decepticons. And then Optimus asked about if there was some other Autobots that she had any feelings towards. That surprised another Infamous question because she really had never expected that question. But she did mention there was at least one Autobot that she had feelings towards. And he asked her who, but she didn't mention by name. Someone who was a strong fighter, at least, and very skilled in combats. And but by in for Optimus' case, there was only one who knew about his feelings towards Elita, and that was Bumblebee. Bumblebee, of all, had often tried to convince Optimus to tell her about his feelings towards her. Because Optimus had tried to convince Bumblebee, maybe there wasn't word to try to convince her or something, but Bumblebee had did in fact told him, it is tell her how you feel. And even though in the past on Cybertron when he tried for many times to tell her, but never had a chance to do that. But now, living on Earth with the Autobots, with the new friends, he had the opportunity to do so. Because of the past month, there has not been any battles against Decepticons. It's like they just vanished. But the Autobots were always on high alert if Decepticons would appear or at least do something. But after been talking to Leah, he then asked her if she maybe just want to do something with them, like go to on a road trip, just do two of them, like they did back on Cybertron. And she actually didn't mind that because she would like that. So they decided to do that in the morning. And later that, in the morning, Optimus had given Bumblebee, it was now put in second command of the base and the other Autobots, but would be able to contact him if there was any needed of any support. So they actually went just on the road talking and just talked about some old memories when after they had been riding around on the street on the roads for nearly almost an entire day, they stopped near the lake on a cliff. They there to sit down and just talked about their old times on Cybertron. How they often watched the stars together before even the Civil War even started. There were a point when he did was about to tell Elita One about his feelings, but always closed it and stopped himself from doing it. He wanted to do it, but he had no idea how she would react, or if she had no feeling, if has feelings for him at all, because he knows that she likes at least one Autobot, but he had no idea who it could have been, for since there were at least 11 Autobots of all on Earth, and it could be anyone. It could have been him, it could have been Bumblebee, it could have been Jazz or Ratchet, or even Ironhide, or basically any of them. But he then had mentioned that he wanted to tell her something. And just before that he was about to tell her, they heard a scream, or at least some shooting, and they saw Starscream appear. It turned out Starscream was looking around for any new potential power source for Decepticons. But when he discovered two Autobots, Optimus and Elita One, after a brief fighting against him, he decided just to leave because there was no worth to fight against two Autobots on his own. Because he had no idea and he knew he would stand no chance against them both, especially Optimus Prime. After that, he had left. Then he then mentioned to Elita One about his feelings, which did surprise her. But then she told him that he was the one that she had feeling for, which surprised him. But after they had been talking on this mountain, they decided maybe it would try to give a try to being dating as a romantic couple. Since both of them have been studying some of humans' dating customs, and even have talked to some of their human friends, which gave them some more idea how to do so. But after a while, about 2 years, their relationship were still steady. Even the friends were very supportive to their relationship. But after 2 years, there were a big fight against Decepticons. During this fight, Optimus was shot by Megatron, and it looked like they had killed him. But after that, when Elita saw that Optimus was shot, she thought maybe it would be the worst. And even the other Autobots were really surprised and even terrified what just happened. So they all start firing against Megatron, Starscream, and the others in order to protect Optimus. Even they thought he was dead. Just protecting his body was the sign of this their continuous of fighting. But during the fight, Elita One, along with Chaz and Bumblebee, were able to fire against Megatron. They severely injured him or damaged him so much just before they were about to leave when Bumblebee shot the final blow that somehow made Megatron drop down to the ground and was dead, or at least half dead. He was able to regain his conscience and leave. And from this moment, the others Autobots believed that Optimus was killed. But almost big shock, he was in fact still alive, but just damaged and he needs some repair. And even Elita One was so happy that he had survived. But they all knew this constant battle against Decepticons would never stop. But then, even when they knew that the Decepticons had their obsession to controlling the entire universe, Optimus sent a message to Megatron, giving him the final opportunity, or at least the final agreement, to leave Earth alone forever by sending him back to Cybertron. That will which Megatron didn't even believe that he had some capability to. But he then showed them the schematics for a space bridge, which that the Decepticons once used, but now the Autobots had perfected the Cybertron, the space bridge technology, and they were actually willing to send a lot of more power for the Decepticons to survive on Cybertron because of something. Because during only 6 months earlier, Optimus received a message from space. In fact, it was from Cybertron, and it turned out several other Autobots were still very much alive on Cybertron, and that the war against both sides had been ended. Both Autobots and Decepticons on Cybertron had made peace. They both realized there was no time to even know where to fight. Even they were almost depleting all the needed resources. Even though they had managed to build new factories that could had to produce more power, but doing destroying one factory and after another, it would eventually lead their extinction. So both the factions on Cybertron had finally stopped fighting and made peace. And they had even made a council, which had both Autobots and Decepticon leaders. But when Megatron was told about this, he didn't even believe. But one then suddenly a message from Cybertron to Megatron, and it showed by a live feed from the council chamber. He's seen Autobots and Decepticons working together, and that Cybertron had been restored his former glory. And they have now power that can last for everyone, including Megatron and his Decepticons. And he was given an opportunity. Leave Earth, go back to Cybertron, and live peacefully with the others. And they will no longer need to be conquering the universe because they needed more power or more energy for to survive. So Megatron, even though he didn't want to even believe, but he agreed. Even luckily he didn't want first, but after so much this debating among the other Decepticons, Shock, Soundwave, Starscream, they both decided they want to go back to Cybertron after finding out there was no peace, and also there were enough power and energy from both the factions to be able to survive. So they both decided it was best for them to do so. But Earth would remain in contact with Cybertron and even be able to send more power just in case if it was needed. And even after when they returned, Megatron, he even became a leader among us council on Cybertron. After the Decepticons had left Earth permanently, Optimus and Elita One had now decided it was time to be more involved romantically. Now that Earth was enough in peace and protected from any sources, and that the Decepticons had now made peace with the Autobots. Even if respected that the Autobots were really surprised that even medical Megatron was even considered to do any peace with them, and that he would leave Earth just like that. Even with that, when even some of the Autobots like Jazz or Bumblebee has said, "No way, he actually did that. He actually they saw him leaving," and then he said to Optimus, "Maybe we see again, but this time not as fighters in peace." And so they went, and it still happened. And the fight against between the Cybertron, the Autobots, and Decepticons was now finally over after millions of years of fighting. But that didn't stop it though. Now when Optimus and Elita was now able to live their own lives together, they were having a support from their human friends and the other Autobots on Earth. After that, Optimus and Elita, they had some sort of Autobot wedding. But for some reason, Optimus told Elita they were going to Cybertron for the honeymoon for about a week or so, and they hadn't even been on home for millions of years. But when it came back, they were surprised how much their lives on Cybertron had changed. But even being on honeymoon for on Cybertron for about a week, they felt homesick for Earth. And after they came back, they were really happy to be with the one they loved the most, though. But it didn't happen much longer because when suddenly Optimus went back to Cybertron with Elita One, and only about several days later, when they came back with suddenly two more Autobots. But this one was actually smaller ones, at least about the same size as Bumblebee. It was a son and a daughter, which turned out that the Autobots found a reason had rediscovered a way for building more about their kind, and they had built a son and a daughter for Optimus Prime and Elita One. And when they came back, the Autobots on Earth was really surprised that two more Autobots had actually, in fact, to been brought back to Earth. What about the Autobots? What about the peace between the Autobots and Decepticons? Was that never in jeopardy? No. In fact, the peace between the two fractions had become stable. And in fact, the fighting against between the Decepticons and Autobots was now over permanently. There were even some skeptical among the Autobots. This peace would never last, had many of them said, but the peace did did remain stable. Even for Optimus, he actually had started like his new life on Earth. Even then, he still was the leader of the Autobots, but he preferred even now to be like a teacher, or at least telling the new generations of Autobots about the past, some of the adventures they had been on from Earth. Even after several times back on Earth, they went back to Cybertron, at least for visits. But now when Cybertron had the ability to open and maintain a space bridge more often as they possibly could before. Even when there were some crises or some low power supplies on Cybertron, the people on Earth, humans, they had made a peace treaty with the Cybertrons in heavens and were willing to send some more power supplies to the Cybertron to be able to survive, which in hindsight was really good idea. And even after all this time, after all these millions of years, Optimus was really happy to be with Elita One. and their relationship between each other remained strong. Even that Optimus didn't have any idea that their relationship would one day to be flourish into a marriage and later a family. Even even in his this was actually that he wanted to happen, but at the same time he was very scared if it would really happen. But now that the Decepticons was in peace with the Autobots, he was just happy that the peace was strong and that all the others was still happy that it happened. But for Elita, she was also equally happy to have Optimus in her life to be with the one that she loved the most. And this is how Optimus Prime and Elita One from the true love got a family together. The